Chapter 1, New Life. Part 1. Xiao Yu opened his eyes. What greeted him was an unfamiliar ceiling before his eyes. 4. Where am I? Xiao Yu muttered weakly. The feeling of fatigue lingered within him while his state of mind were at best hazy, as the only thing he remembers was an incoming train rushing toward his direction. That's right. It was a train, Xiao Yu finally remembered. He remembers saving a little boy who accidentally fell onto the train track as the training was coming into the station. 4. None of the adults were brave enough to risk themselves, thus Xiao Yu steeled his resolve and tried his best to save the kid. He succeeded, but at the cost of his life in the end. Xiao Yu did not regret saving that kid in exchange for his life. If he had to choose again, he would still choose to save him. At least the kid has a bright future ahead of him, unlike Xiao Yu who has nothing but to live day in and day out, with no family or relatives and no one to love. 1. Aren't I supposed to be dead? Xiao Yu became confused as he looked around at his surroundings, a marble white room decorated in red and gold with a window showing a beautiful golden sun and it light bathed the world in a tint of that gold. Before a mirror in the room caught his eyes, a floating mirror reflecting the appearance of a slender beautiful boy with peachy skin, glowing green eyes, pointy long ears and long silky golden hair slightly flowing with the warm breeze from outside. What kind of sick joke is this? Xiao Yu was utterly speechless at the sight before his eyes. In the mirror was himself, from a 20-years-something young man, to a blood elf child in luxurious red and gold clothing. It wasn't long before memories that were not his own began to surface. Apparently this blood elf child was named Athas, 10 years old and of course without a surname, not to confuse him with the famous Athas Sunriver. His parents named him so he could use the elf as a role model and possibly used that bit of motivation to ascend his family into a different social class. 1. In a sense his family wasn't rich but they're not poor either. Their income was enough to send little Athas to school and learn about the world and not remain ignorant for all his long life. When you have a dad working as one of the far strider killing undead in the Dead Scar like a champion and a mother who owned a trade goods shop, your life is bound to cut above the common folks. To summarize Xiao Yu's situation up, he seemed to have encountered that fable, I've reincarnated into another world type of thing from all those novels he loved so much. Even without a broken sheet like a system, Xiao Yu was glad that he got a second chance of life with a loving family, albeit it's a bit abnormal to be an elf in a fantasy world where war is an everyday occurrence. At least he wasn't reincarnated as a gnome. 1. From this day onward, I am Athas, I will take charge of my destiny. Xiao Yu, now known as Athas, declared proudly in front of the golden sun. 1. What are you yelling about, Athas? From behind the door, his mother's words sounded which quickly brought him back from his dreamy daydream to reality. 1. Nothing, mother. I was only practicing my spells. Athas responded, only to hear his mother gasping on the other side of the door in sheer terror. Athas! How many times have I told you not to practice magic in your room? Do it outside before that. Come down and get ready for supper, his mother reprimanded him. The truth was, Athas does not know any magic less for the basic from the memories of the old Athas before his soul took over this body. Welcome to Azeroth, home sweet home for who knows how long it's going to be. Athas sighed before heading out of his room to the kitchen below where his mother is waiting for him, along with the wondrous food this world, Azeroth, has to offer. Once again, Athas, Xiao Yu, was glad that he wasn't born as a gnome. What fate was than becoming spare ammunition for the Alliance siege engine. 6. Part 2. When Athas arrived down from the spire, he could see his mother was waiting for him in front of the dinner table. The sight of her was breathtaking to say the least, a beautiful creature that could not and will never be appear on Earth. His old world in all fantasy fiction he had read, one thing always rings true: all elves are beautiful in their own right. Athas had guessed this is where his beauty had come from instead of the man who sat at one end of the table drinking wine straight from the bottle, which was his father, whom had a figure of a bear, all muscles and scarred, the true definition of a warrior. If Athas, Xiao Yu, didn't know his situation beforehand and come without the imprinted memories, he would have thought that his dad was an ORC with peachy skin and golden blonde hair. 6. Secretly, Athas is glad that he did not inherit that ogre or ORC like gene from his dad's side of the family. It wasn't a harmful thing if Athas were to choose the profession of a paladin or a warrior, but the trade-off is just too much for him to handle. 1. Athas, my son. Come join your father for a drink. His father beckoned him over to the dinner table as he uncorked another bottle of wine and poured Athas a glass, but before he could hand it the kid the glass filled with fine alcohol, a silver tray came crashing onto his head, creating a deep dent. What in the name of the holy are you intended on doing? You are not supposed to give children alcohol. Did all these time spending in the Dead Scar rotted your brain, you fool? Mama, Athas reprimanded him. I'm sorry honey, I was only joking. I'm sure my little boy know better than to accept alcohol at his age. Did you forget that he inherited beauty from you while the good judgment comes from me? His dad muttered weakly in front of a ferocious woman he calls his wife. Athas only raised an eyebrow before finding a chair and sat down. Athas, are you feeling any better now? You've been sleeping all day today. If you didn't wake up for supper, your mother would have called for an alchemist to have a look at you. Did you catch a cold? His father asked while sliced off a chicken leg and passed it over to little Athas. No father, I was just feeling tired and wished to take a good rest. Athas replied while taking small bites from the food on his plate, secretly complimenting the unique flavor it has to offer. Food in a medieval fantasy world with sword and magic does taste different. His father just nodded. Take good care of your health. I don't know what magic school is like since I've never taken one before, but I heard it sound very stressful from my colleague. Just don't overdo it. He paused for a moment. We Sindore have all the time in the world to master our art and magic is our birthright gift. You will get the hang of it eventually, his father advised him. 1. Deep inside, Athas has no clue of what the hell is going on. Most of his memories from the previous life and this body has completely merged without much of a problem. However, some were fragmented and disappeared into the void, leaving blank areas within his sea of conscious. It might not pose much problem in the long run. However, for now it might be a problem as most of these memories involved the usage of magic. 2. Yes, father, I understand. That was all Athos could say, hoping for the best. What worried him now was the magic school that his parents had been talking about. Eat up, you need to go back to rest, lest you want to not have any energy for classes the next morning, his father told him as he passed over more vegetables while leaving all the meat for himself. Thank you, father. Athos stealthily swept the green to the side and went back to the meat dishes. 2. His mother could only let out a long sigh. Like father like son. She rubbed her eyebrows looking at the two of them, but couldn't help to let out a small laugh. Later that night when both of his parents had retired to their bed, Athos was in his room on top of the spire, looking outside the window, staring at the bright moon overhead. Thinking of how his wish before death has been granted, receiving a warm, loving family in his next life, albeit into a very fuck-up world that wanted you dead on every turn if you are a weakling, but nonetheless, he was happy for now, might as well live it to the fullest and not wasted it like his past life. Behind Athos, there was an illusion of his past life. Xiao Yu, standing watched over him with a kind smile. Athos noticed this and responded back with a smile of his own, showing that he had long accepted this new life. The illusion soon faded away. Goodbye Xiao Yu, thank you for a good life. Chapter 2, The School of Magic. Part 1. Good morning children, greeted the magic instructor to a group of young, beautiful children before his eyes. 2. I am known as hold on a moment, that might not really be necessary, from now on, you all can address me as Professor Sunreach. Professor Sunreach began to introduce himself to the children, which in this case included Athos, who sat on a corner watching intensively. 1. If there is one thing that's true to the appearance of all blood elves, but never stated in the known law that Athos has once read through on the internet, they are all narcissists, especially the male one. Athos doesn't blame them since beauty is indeed a blessing and a curse at the same time. He too couldn't help but admire himself once or twice in the mirror since the day he reincarnated over. As one might have already guessed, today Athos started his first day of school. Isn't that exciting, no matter where you've been, past or present life? The first day of school is always exciting, especially when your class is a magical one. As long as Professor Sunreach can conclude his little introduction that has gone on for far too long. That concluded my introduction for now, as you might have already known this, you children are too young to understand even the basic concept of the arcane art itself. Professor Sunreach snapped a finger and a scroll instantly appeared in his hand. Thus, I shall teach you the basics of enchanting and disenchanting, since there should be plenty of resources for you children to practice with after class. Professor Sunreach opened up the scroll and looked around his small classroom and finally pointed at Athos, who was sitting quietly in a corner. You there, student, would you kindly come up to the stage and be my assistant for this demonstration? Also, bring along your amulet. Professor Sunreach told him. Alright students, I will now demonstrate to you the most basic method of casting and imbuing an enchantment onto an object of your desire. Professor Sunreach then tore the scroll in half. The moment the scroll was shredded, it quickly burst into flame and magical energy began to wrap around his finger. Professor Sunreach then quickly redirected that energy into the amulet in Athos' hand. That, students, is the most basic method of using an enchantment scroll to enchant an object. There is no complication or whatsoever. Just store up the scroll, redirect that power into the object of which you wish to enchant. Professor Sunreach grabbed the amulet from Athos' hand and showed to the class, the former silver amulet now shimmering with a blue light under the sunlight. After showing the student his handiwork, Professor Sunreach gave back the amulet to Athos and sent him back to the mass of student down below to return to his seat. Does you children has any question regarding to enchanting? He asked. Immediately Athos raised his hand, attracting the attention of Professor Sunreach, along with all the other students in his class. Yes child, what is your question? Professor Sunreach, can you tell me more about the enchantment you placed onto this amulet? Athos asked with curiosity. Athos didn't bother asking about what enchantment or disenchantment is because most people probably have a good idea of what they are, so there's no point in rebriefing it again. What he is curious about was, what kind of enchantment did the professor place on his birthday amulet his father had given him? It's just a mana-gathering enchantment from one of my old research, nothing too major. The professor played it off like it was nothing, but it surprised Athos. A mana-gathering or based on the name alone, a mana regeneration perk enchantment is hard to come by in the game and it is a mid-level enchantment designed for bracer, instead of jewelries. 1. Classes gone by without much of a hitch afterward, Professor Sunreach taught them many things about the basic of magic, more on the side of enchantment, disenchantment and how to create minor ward that could block a hit or two from a kid. These may be irrelevant when Athos thought of how he could fight deadly bosses, but it serves as a foundation of knowledge for powerful spells in the future. For now Athos just soak in as much knowledge as possible, they might come in handy in the near future. Part 2. Later that day, after classes were over and Athos returned to his home somewhere in Eversong Forest, there he quickly went into his room and began laying out trinkets and shiny bauble, smooth stones and such on the beautiful red carpet. Time for practical usage and application of knowledge. These are the materials he prepared himself on his way back from school. He purchased these goods from a local store near his school for a few copper, which was dirt cheap in his opinion as Athos' basic allowance were roughly 5 silver weekly, and there's also his saving as well, which added up to around 120 silver coins. As for why those 100 silver coins didn't, magically, converted into gold coin like it was in the game, well folks, this is reality not game-defying logic. 3. These amounts are by no means small. An average commoner family could live off of these amounts for roughly a month. As for why any parents would be crazy enough to entrust such an amount to barely old enough to be a teenager, that is because this can be considered a pocket change to their paycheck. His mother ran a business that regularly traded in gold coins while his bear-like father's job as a far strider captain who fight the undead in the Dead Scar. He's bound to strike off a decent amount just from picking up the loot from the dead, combine that with the pay of a small-time officer in the armed services. 7. Athos used the tool from his backpack, mainly just a quill and a bottle of ink, because that's the only thing that available for him at this moment. There are a few runestone Athas wish to create today. The first one is the common ward rune, next is the more useful one, a rune imbued with a bit of healing power, and finally a runestone for a minor fire spell, not to confuse with the mage fireball spell which were designed to kill. The most this rune going to make is a tiny spark, big enough to start a kitchen fire. It's hard to believe they taught these to kids in school. If anyone had a brain, they could turn these into a possibly dangerous weapon of mass destruction. Athas' idea for enchanting a small rock with a fire spell is, he wants to see if he could turn a common rock into a grenade. 1. The things that goes in Athas little would baffle any old sages or mages if they could take a peek at it from time to time, combining modern knowledge and concept in a world of magic where wars are constantly waged across the land, a true recipe for disaster. 1. It took a few hours following all the instruction that was written on the scroll for Athas to complete a bag full of useful rock and other trinkets for future usages. A ward rune is useful in a case when the user was being assaulted. One is enough to last a couple of punches. As for healing rune, it's not as useful but it's still healing, enough to treat minor cuts and injuries that caused minor irritation to the user. But the most useful are these. Athas proudly held up a small shiny marble with a spark sealed within. The marble itself is warm to the touch. It was until Athas randomly tossed the thing out the window without thinking. 1. Oh crap. No, watch out, it finally hit him of the consequence of such an object could do to someone if it hit them right in the head from a roughly 3 stories building. Down below, Father Athas was just returning home from a long day of killing undead and was borderline dead tired. All he wished for now was some good food his wife had prepared for him and fine wine in the cellar. Oh crap. No, watch out, Father Athas could faintly hear the voice of his son. 1. I must have missed the little rascal so much that I'm starting to hear voices in my head. Before he could finish his thought, he saw a sparkling marble flying toward his way and out of instinct, the man pulled his sword and gave it a swift slash, deflecting the marble away at a high speed toward a golden birch tree. Asterisk bang. The moment the marble touched the bark of the tree, it exploded, destroying the outer layer of the tree and charred a patch on it. Father Athas turned to warn his son, whom sticking his head out the window now sweating bullet as he looked at the bear-like figure down below. 1. That's my boy. Ha ha ha. Such a genius. Father Athas gave his beloved son a big thumb up for inventing a makeshift grenade. 2. Chapter 3. Time fly by when you're having fun. Part 1. Later that night, when everyone were at the dinner table. Alright Sony, mind explaining what that was this afternoon or just tell what this is? His dad unwrapped a cloth containing fragments of his shiny marble grenade, or what was left of it anyway, after he dug it out of the tree. Athas is currently sweating bullets as he looked at the fragments on the table, struggling to find his words on how to explain this mess. It's just a little fun experiment. I just want to apply the knowledge Professor Sunreach taught me at class today. Athas tried to show his cute and innocent side as he replied, the puppy eyes is also a bonus. Mother Athas raised an eyebrow as she inspected little Athas' handiwork. Professor Sunreach would taught these kind of offensive magic art at school? I didn't know that you can teach children anything other than the basic defensive art and basic understanding of the arcane art. She pointed out, which was true. Most children in Azeroth simply does not have the mana capacity to cast even the most basic spell. At most they will be learning the basic art of enchanting, disenchanting, wards and basic understanding and defense against magic theories, like what Athas learning currently. All of these are a special case since he is of elven descent, whom are widely known to be very talented in magic as it is their birthright, courtesy of his highborn ancestor. Tell me son, what else do you have hidden up in your room? You've piqued my interest now. Inside Father Athas' head, there was nothing but praise for his genius of a son. To create such magical items at a young age, one could imagine what kind of wonder he could create in the far distant future. Plus, if he could borrow some of these items, it would do wonders in his fight against the undead. One could load these explosive marble into a rifle and create a basic form of artillery. Even though Father Athas disliked the gun technology, he admitted that they are very useful weapon. Weeks later, in the gloomy woods bordering the ghostland. Take aim. And hold, Father Athas is currently commanding the fast rider valiantly on the front line against the undead horde that's shambling toward to invade and destroy what remaining of Eversong Forest. Under the influence of the current Lich King Arthas, these monstrosities are relentless in their mission. Release the arrows, he commanded, and upon so a volley of arrows rained down upon the shambling undead horde consist of mostly of skeletals being remnants of the first invasions, brave Skuldore who sacrificed themselves to hold off the scourge. The moment the volley of arrows made contact with the undead scourge, they exploded, sending bone shards and bit of rotten flesh flying. Seeing this, many of the fast rider were showing look of amazement. Captain, these arrowheads are amazing. Did you see how much damage they've done to the wild scourge? His second in command couldn't help but feel excited. At first he thought, how could a toy of a child, who is barely 10, could contribute much to the effort of pushing back the undead and possibly cleansing Eversong Forest of scourge presence? With a bit of modification from our mages and craftsmen, these toys can be very heated in the hand of professional, a logistics specialist pointed out. The child who invented such a beautiful piece of art deserves much praise, he added. Hearing such praise, Father Athas couldn't help but feel proud of his cute son. He had introduced his son little project to his unit 2 weeks prior, much to the dismay of their discontent toward their commanding officer eccentricity. However, orders is order and thus, they leave it to the logistics specialist to incorporate the toys into their arsenal. When the first prototype came into light, which was an arrowhead completely made of a special alchemical glass, enchanted with a minor fireball spell, Father Athas immediately put them to the test and demonstrate the capability of the prototype on a captured undead. But after a few more improvements on the prototype, the result was satisfactory to say the least. If years of fighting the undead had taught them anything, brittle bones and large potential energy do not go together. I'm sure when words get out to all the other units, and one that fought bravely in the Ghostland, they will do everything in their power to get a hold of a crate full of these little precious at any cost. His second in command rubbed his hand greedily at the thought of selling these weapons of war. Leave that idea aside after we finish cleansing our lands of scourge presence. Other than that, when will the next batches of Reaver Flare be ready? That was the name he had given to the arrowhead. Our jewels crafters and enchanters are working overtime as we speak, so currently, we 20 quilvers, each containing a minimum of 15 arrows ready for service. Unfortunately, we are lacking trained professional for such task. The concepts are simple enough fortunately. All we need is manpower, the logistics specialist answered. Part 2. Our protagonist is oblivious to his father's current ecstasy of course, as he is currently in a fantasy world of his own, busy counting gold coins from a small coffer his father traded him for the right to produce and incorporate his toy and experiment into the military. Now Athas has enough gold coins to fund all kinds of possible experiment in the near future and expenses for buying magical grimoire as well. These can be very expensive. Athas, your friends are waiting for you outside. Go out and play. Stop hiding in your rooms all the time. It's not healthy, Mother Athas' voice called out from the kitchen. Yes, Mother. I'll be down in just a moment. It has been roughly a month or so since Athas was reincarnated over. A lot had happened, such as making a lot of friends at class and creating a grand scheme to take over and rule the world and possibly the infinite dark beyond, screwing over the burning legions and such even before the heroes of Azeroth has the chance of doing so. Athas, by the time Athas walked out of the house, his friends are all already assembled, waiting patiently for him as their leader. It was only right for them to do so due to the fact he has demonstrated his capability during classes which make him rank above many of them in terms of practical knowledge and theories. The group of kids include 4 boys and 2 girls, adding Athas into the mix that would make a total of 7 children. Their plan for the day was, let go to the dead scar, exclaimed one of the boys with excitement. However, all the other children quickly jump and cover the idiot mouth up. This was supposed to be a secret between them. If the adult were to know what these kids are up to, they would freak out beyond reasoning. Who in their right mind would let children venture into an area infested with undead scourge? Other than Athas' own parents? Although where they will venture is only the outskirts of the dead scar, which were only infested with a couple of brittle bones scourge from time to time but nevertheless, dangerous. However, of course Athas being who he is, prepare for such a scenario of encountering the undead, he had made a backpack full of enchanted explosive marble for such occasion. If they encounter any scourge along the way, they could eat a couple of these babies through a slingshot and there won't be a piece of the undead intact. Athas' goal for visiting the dead scar was to salvage any magical items if there's any left, courtesy of the fallen defenders and scourges during the first invasion and possibly any knowledge on necromancy, even though it's a forbidden art and a very dangerous one. If he were to be caught trying to learn such a taboo subject, his fate might be at the burning stake. However, that is only if he were to get caught. To him, there is no right or wrong in a school of magic. What determines what right or wrong is he himself. And as long as he didn't screw up, the path of great power is always there for him to walk. Such is the fate of all isekai persons, well most. Chapter 4, Dead Scar? Part 1. It was around afternoon that Athas and his group arrived at their destination. The children look excitedly at the wasteland before their eyes, filled to the brim with death and remains of scourges and heroes alike, well most of them anyways. The girls in the group only frowned at the sight of bones and long decomposed corpses that stuck out in the dirty black mud. You boys can go down and play in the mud. Valira and I shall be the lookout, one of the girls declared and volunteered for the non-Handine role of their little expedition after she carefully weighed the pros and cons of either dig in the disgusting ground that is the dead scar to look for treasures, or just stand on the sideline and be a lookout, where it's safe and she will still get a share of the loot in the end. Of course, Athas being the only adult in the group, technically since his soul was indeed much older than these children, could understand why the girls would choose such task. Alright, just stay there and warn us if you see anything. Girls being girls, they tend to dislike doing the rewarding dirty work. Athas doesn't have much complaining as either way, they're only children in the end. Alright boys, grab a shovel from your backpack and follow me. Athas came prepared. He previously asked his teacher, Professor Sunreach, to see if there were any treasure hunting magical items for sale, and indeed being a magic researcher and a renowned mage that he was, Athas managed to buy it off for a fair price of 10 gold coins. Well worth the investment for finding riches. The item was an enchanted compass, make a whole lot of sense in a way as the moment Athas stepped into the black soil of the dead scar, the needle began to spin in heavier before stopping and locking onto a certain direction. Look like the reading is that way. Follow me my minion. Treasure await for us. Athas excited ran toward the direction where the needle indicates the location of a magical reading. The rest of the boys followed Athas excitedly, shovel in hand, while the girls just followed along on the side lane, not daring to set foot in the black soil filled with long withered away essence of undeath. It wasn't long before they arrived at their destination, which was a large fallen tree that has long withered and rotted away. It should be here. Let's start digging, of course being cautious about it. We don't know what in the light is under this log. It could be anything, so just prepare. Athas pointed at the middle section of the rotting golden birch tree that was uprooted ages ago during the invasion of Quel'Thalas by the fallen prince, Earthas Menethil. The boys nodded and began to carefully dig around the area. It wasn't long before one of the boy, his name was Faramis, his shovel managed to unearth a skeletal hand buried under the log, covered in ragged clothes of course, doesn't seem to belong to any elven style of craftsman. Athas guesses that it must be from an undead scourge. Look like we found a jackpot guys, the reading is strong for this one. Athas said excitedly, seeing the needle spinning non-stop as he moved near the skeletal remains. 1. After digging a bit more, the children managed to pull the entire remains of the undead scourge up. It what looked like to be a skeletal mage, covering in ragged robe, hand endorsed with rings and a book covered in chains stuck to its waist. It was the book that caught Athas' eyes. The book seemed to be made of a black leather material and an airy facial feature of what looked like the face of a humanoid creature was plastered on the front cover, bound by chains. What an evil-looking book, just how I like it. Athas grinned as he grabbed the book from the dead scourge mage and began dusting it a bit. Athas carefully unwrapped the chain and read the content on the first page of the book, which was nicely enough to have a title. 1. Book of the Dead, with the author being Kel'Thuzad, the infamous Lich Lord of Naxxramas, one that caused misery to the countless souls and formerly a powerful mage of the Kirin Tor whom studied the forbidden art of necromancy. Oh, this is juicy. Athos couldn't help but exclaim, "This is indeed a good finding. If anyone were to see such an object, their first thought would be burn it and spread it ashes in the eastern sea so no innocent could set eyes on it ever again." However, Athos was different. Such priceless artifacts shouldn't be destroyed. It should be studied under strict supervision. Himself, Athos quickly closed the book and hid it in his backpack, much to the curiosity of the children as they were about to ask Athos what that was. However, before they could voice it out, the children's facial feature immediately turned ghastly pale as they pointed behind Athos' back. "Boss, BB behind you!" Faramis yelped. Part 2. Die. Mortal, the skeletal mage yelled in a ghastly voice as the creature began rising up. The chilling soul fire lit its eyes as the monstrosity of unliving set its gaze upon the group of innocent children, Athos included, as he held the sacred object belonging to the dead and dead only. What the hell? Athos jumped away from the creature as it began casting a frost spell, judging by the chilling aura emitted from its skeletal hands. "Like hell, I'm going to let you take your sweetest time casting a spell." Athos loaded an explosive marble onto his slingshot and launched the deadly projectile at the rotten head with a bang. Seeing their boss took the initiative attacking such a terrifying creature, the kids followed suit by launching explosive of their own. Ow! And oh! Stop it. Being a mage has its pros and cons, the pros being having the ability to throw out an insane amount of damage while the downside is being screw once being focused by attack on all sides. The skeletal mage wailed miserably as hail of explosive marble smashed against its body, chipping off bones and sending limbs flying. The killing shot was coming from Athos, blowing up the skull with a marble right in the forehead. In the end, what remained was only pieces of jewelry and old rusted trinkets mixed in pile of broken bones. Seeing this, the children quickly went in and began looting the dead corpse. After that, they quickly make a run for it and return back home, and divided the loot before the undead showed up. Since they made quite a ruckus with raining down hell upon the poor skeletal mage, of course they took their chance digging up more stuff on the way back. By the time they reached home, it was already sunset. To sum up their entire trip today at the Dead Scar in a more efficient manner, they dig, they break, and loot, and dig some more, filling up their kids' treasury that would shock any grown-up if they were discovered. List of items obtained. 1 enchanted ring. 1 enchanted necklace. 2 trinkets. 11 rusted weapons. A few copper coins. Added into group treasury, signed by Athos. Or so what Athos filed in their account log, which was set up by himself in order to keep track of his future minions along with their spending and assets. Of course, not being an idiot, he did not register the Book of the Dead, which he discovered, and pocketed. Perks of being the guild leader. He can get away with these kinds of stuff. Corrupted, yes, he isn't denying it, but who cares? As long as he's still feeding carrots to the minions and keeping them happy, none of this would matter anyway. 2. What better way to take over the world? Other than to create an organization that's solely loyal to him and would carry out his will without questioning? Progress is slow as they're still kids, but if he were to dedicate his time training them, sure, it will get there eventually. 2. This thought somewhat terrified Athos as he wasn't like this before his untimely reincarnation to this side of the universe, but it doesn't matter now. Maybe it's because he finally had a family and he wished to keep them safe at any cost. 2. Anything that could possibly put them in harm's way must be eliminated or promptly secured from happening. If it means taking over the world of Azeroth, then so be it. 1. Putting modern knowledge and magical knowledge to good use is the first step, but for now, let's find out what this precious has to offer. Athos smiled gleefully after locking the door and setting the Book of the Dead on the table and began to read its content, which bound to contain a great deal of knowledge, seeing the author was an infamous lich. Asterisk Omake. Athos reached out his hand and grabbed the old leather-bound grimoire from the skeleton of the undead mage the moment his hand touched the book. A new hand touched the grimoire. A cold yet obnoxiously loud voice sounded in his head. First, it confused the living daylight out of him, and secondly, 2. What the fuck? Wrong game. Athos cried out. Chapter 5, Book of the Dead and the Continuation. Part 1. Athos' heartbeat raced as he began reading the dreaded grimoire, written by a crazed mage who served the dreaded Lich King. The first chapter of the Book of the Dead give details and a rundown of the forbidden dark arts of necromancy, based on Kel'Thuzad's point of view. For some reason, after reading the lengthy details of the first chapter alone, Athos couldn't help but feel that Kel'Thuzad might be a bit overly infatuated with his undead self for writing this chapter. It only mostly detailed his great and, supremely, practicality of being one of the undead. 1. Chapter 1 of Volume 1, Article 001, The Soul of the Living and Dead Basic Instruction on Necromancy and Path to Lichdom. As Athos continued to read, he could somewhat hallucinate and picture Kel'Thuzad speaking these words and written it down onto the Codex of the Unliving in his graspy cold voice. The soul of the living, it's a wonderful mystery of the world. How were they created and born? Does it come naturally? Why does it hold so much raw untapped power? Kel'Thuzad commented. As the bullshit continued with Kel'Thuzad's own crazy mindset putting into words, a few keys knowledge does reveal itself from time to time. For example, the instruction on how to harvest the lingering essence of death and convert it to mana to supply the user. The next part is how the user can weave those converted mana into disease and corruption spells, along with the basic creation of undead minions. Athos doesn't want to touch that area yet as he feared he would lose control of the undead and cause trouble to himself. Based on the lore of the Warcraft universe, all undead that hasn't been fully controlled by a powerful necromancer, tremendous willpower, or freed by the Banshee Queen has a chance of being feral and heed to the call of the Lich King himself and bound to his will. Athos doesn't want to mess with the Lich King just yet. He need a minimum amount of power to protect himself first, then he can fuck around with Athos, or this case, Ner'zhul, since he doesn't know which one is in control. Athos stay up all night, carefully studying and taking down notes about the chapter. By morning, a large stack of parchment was sitting on his table. The candle was long burned out and leaving melted wax on the table where Athos currently taking a rest from his all-nighter. Outside of his window was a beautiful day awaited. The sun was shining brightly, giving off warm radiance in the land partially infested with undead, bird chirping and mana WYRM loitering around in the grass. Suddenly a bird flew in from the window and landed near Athas, chirping obnoxiously trying to annoy him. Much to Athas' annoyance, he just used a pillow and covered his entire head. A disturbing scene happened next, a black smoke radiating energy of death and decay circling around the boy. It doesn't seem to harm him, just loitering around Athas it suddenly shot toward the obnoxious bird and draining the life out of the critter. It only took a second before the previously lively bird lost its life and dropped dead. 1. When Athas woke up, the first thing he saw was the corpse of the critter, laying there before his eyes. Athas was shocked. What in the world just happened? He was about to reach out and poke the dead critter, but he immediately pulled his hand back as he saw a bluish energy slowly rising from the dead bird floating toward and dancing around his hand. Oh, this is... Athas couldn't believe his eyes, but the sensation is there. Fucking awesome. Finding such words coming out of a 10 years is wrong is so many different ways, but Athas is the exception since he is a reincarnator from another world. The bluish power that currently dancing on Athas' palm is none other than soul power, more specifically the soul of the obnoxious little bird that annoyed him. This brought up a huge question though. How did this little critter who were previously jumping up and down lively, suddenly ended up dead and its soul flew toward him? Something must have caused it to die. But what? Athas carefully examined that corpse, looking for any possible cause of death. Nothing. The only striking feature about this corpse was its eyes rolled to the back of its head and foam coming from its mouth. It looks as if the poor bird got squeezed the air out of it. Poor bird, no matter if you are an obnoxious little piece of shit when you are alive, it's still a shame. Athas threw the incident onto the back corner of his mind and stored the corpse in a small box and buried it outside in the yard and proceeded to move on with life. Moving on to the soul power that was in his hand, Athas followed the note instruction and carefully convert the soul into raw power and absorb it into his body. Upon doing so, Athas would feel that his mind is getting visibly clearer but not by much. If there's a comparison, it's like getting a jolt from a cup of morning coffee. It only lasted for a few seconds though. Oh, this is so corrupted, eating the soul of another living being. Athas chuckled. He could imagine the face of his parents if they knew what had just happened. Evil as it might be, but the feeling of getting a power boost is quite addicting, more so than the so-called mana addiction that the Sindore is facing. This suddenly gave Athas a great idea as he looks at the wanted notice for cleaning up pest in the garden of the good citizen of Quel'Thalas. Part 2. Near an Arcane Sanctum in the Eversong Wood, a mana wormling is currently happily gorging itself on the mana generated by the structure that harvested raw mana from the ley line itself to support the nearby Blood Elf settlement. These majestic creatures were once helper of mages and sorcerer alike in Quel'Thalas, kept as a pet for the rich and nobility. However, alas, after the explosion of the Sunwell, these creatures broke loose from the elves' control and wrought havoc upon the citizens of the kingdom with their ability of eating precious mana that's already became scared after the Sunwell destruction. 1. From out of nowhere, a red marble came flying in and exploded the mana wormling, killing it instantly by blowing its head into pieces. The creature shrunk and reverted into a round orb and dropped on the ground. That's number 15, time to collect my reward. Athas walked over and quickly siphoned any bit of mana that was left on the creature, along with pulling its soul onto his hand and convert it to his own power. After that he pocketed the mana WYRM core. Since the day Athas discovered the ability of assimilation soul into power, he has been doing pest extermination, daily quest around villages for the people, gaining more and more power with each kill. The difference might be small, but it does add up over time. It has been going on for 3 years already, to the point where he had built up a small reputation for himself among villagers. His service was on the cheap side too. Valira, mind take these back and cash it out at the guild? I'm going to make a few more trips before sundown today. Don't forget to deposit 50% into our guild coffer. You can keep the rest for your use and make sure to register it into the log. Athas handed the beautiful blood elf girl companion the bag containing mana WYRM core before heading off. She was none other than Valira, not to be confused with the famous assassin Valira. She was one of Athas' original companions since they were still 10 in Professor Sunreach class. She had proved herself to be quite a capable minion during the years, thus Athas decided to give her more responsibility in the guild as his secretary of the treasury. WHA? Asterisk I never mind, just make sure to be back on time, or else your mother will give our guild another visit again. Valira was flabbergasted by Athas' action, however she quickly swallowed her word and rubbed the area between her eyes. She had known Athas long enough. It's part of the job description of being a maid secretary to the guild leader. However, she still doesn't understand this boy eccentricity. She still don't remember why she chose to follow him around one day after class, might be because of his display of knowledge and understanding in the subject. Or perhaps it was just the fact that she found him to be cute from time to time. Valira remembered Athas' radiant smile when he helped her during study time. Ah, what the hell am I thinking? She blushed and slapped her cheek before quickly headed back to the guild and quickly cashed out the payment. Oh. Athas. Make sure to study for your graduation exam. She quickly turned around to remind Athas that there is going to be an exam that's coming up for Professor Sunreach class. Got it, Tilda, was all that the wine managed to carry back to Valira's ears. Chapter 6, Power Testing and Revisiting the Dead Scar. Standing at the edge of the Dead Scar outskirt, Athas eyed on the shambling brittle horror walking on the black, dead soil filled with the anguish of millions of lives that were forced to turn into undead and marched through. Athas' eyes flashed an ominous glint as he focused on the walking skeleton wandering in the dead zone absent-mindedly. After years of absorbing soul to strengthen himself, Athas now had some confidence in trying to control some of the weaker undead roaming in the outskirts, breaking their bond with the Lich King and bringing the minion under his absolute control. You will obey. Athas doesn't waste much of his time of the day either. Whatever there was free time, he will go back and study the notes from the Book of the Dead. 3 years is plenty of time for anyone to master the basics of magic, let alone a blood elves, whom magic is their birthright to wield as they desired. The skeletal minion that Athas is targeting began to struggle and combusted into blue flames. After the flame died down, the creature stood motionless and watched Athas with a blue soul flame for eyes. Success. It was a success. He managed to wrought control of the undead minion from the hive mind of the undead scourge and brought it under his control. Even though this undead was just a weakling among the general population of the Scourge, it's still progress. Seeing that his power has reached a substantial point, Aethas snapped his fingers and the minion immediate collapsed and its soul flowed toward him, fueling and expanding his mana reserve even further. Years of eating, soul of countless critters and from time to time, bigger animals, had expanded Aethas' mana reserve beyond that of what could be considered normal even among elves. It should be more than enough for him to pass and enrolled in the magical academy within the Sunstrider Isle by the end of the year. Aethas wished he could say that to all his minion, but it turned out that not all are talented enough to be mages. Of the 4 boys that followed Aethas, 2 of them choose to be a paladin, 1 decided to follow the path of a warrior, while the last has a talent to be a rogue, maybe because of his family circumstances, while Valira chosen to be a ranger and the last girl, Letheria, became a priest. Aethas seemed to be the only one in the class that has any chance of becoming a certified mage. Much to his own surprises, elves does have talent in magic sure, but with the scarcity of mana and the willpower of the user to manage their thirst, many had given up the chance of becoming a mage. As for the knowledge they learned from Professor Sunreach class, it's just knowledge about life skills to help them whenever they needed. Good thing they won't be separated because of their choices. Sunstrider Isle teached all kind of classes, from the lowly rogue assassination class, to the noble priests. 5. Of course, to get into the academy, they first need to pass Professor Sunreach minimum standard on practical knowledge test, then they can earn a small scholarship and recommendation for the academy on the Sunstrider Isle. The things about the scholarship is it will only sponsor them for a maximum of 2 years. After that, they are on their own and will have to find a way to make a living. Of course, the student can choose to stay on the Isle and look for work. Most did anyway, but Aethas has a better plan and a much greater ambition. His plan was to enroll into the Laran, however that might pose a bit of a problem. The Laran disappeared from once its original location in Hillsbrad Foothill. Many do not know where the city vanished to and left only a magical energized crater behind, but Aethas knows based on his knowledge, the city itself should be in Crystalsong Forest, Northrend, the front door of the Lich King domain. All Aethas need to do now is either find a route there, or somehow create a portal and travel to the city itself. Aethas might have to take his chance and ask Professor Sunreach, as after boosting his own power to a certain point, Aethas could somewhat gauge the magical power of his teacher, and one thing is certain, he is not weak despite how he showed himself. The old elf is a powerful mage. Even though there was no record of his name etched in the wiki page, Aethas already threw most of what canon lore out the window since his reincarnation. Part 2. After Aethas returned home to his family, washing himself up, eating dinner, chatting with his mother and father, listening to his father bragging about his current valiant deed for the day, nothing much is going on, yes of course. They encourage him to study harder and quickly become a mage and then a magistrate in the court serving their prince Kilthas. Unbeknown to them that Kilthas' Sunstrider has long betrayed their people for Kil'jaeden the Deceiver and the Burning Legion, judging by history told by Professor Sunreach that their prince has returned from Outland and currently resided in the palace on Quel'Thana's Isle a short distance from their capital city of Silvermoon City. 1. So if his guess is right, Kilthas must have been defeated in Outland and was forced to retreat back to Azeroth, where he planned to bring his new master, Kil'jaeden the Deceiver, to Azeroth, using the remnant of the Sunwell as a portal. This is good news and bad news at the same time for Aethas. The good news is there's a good chance of him going to the Laran sooner or later, possibly within the next couple of years. The bad news is, currently he is not strong enough to personally secure his life from all kinds of threats that exist out there. If he were to face the demon lord Kil'jaeden in his weakened form right now, just a little sneeze would be enough to obliterate him, let alone the might of the full might of the Lich King. Aethas need to immediately get stronger, the sooner the better. He needed to speed up his plan for this world. It's either get eaten or be eaten in this savage world, to survive all the catastrophe and chaos that will soon ensue. 1. Soon enough, the day of the exam arrived, marked by the warm morning sun. Yet as always, the moment he woke up, his room was either filled by a corpse of some kind, either a random squirrel, bird, or insects. This has been going on for years already, to the point where he was used to it. Thus he quickly cleaned up the mess, harvest the critter soul and collect any usable reagent from the creature before burn it with a fire spell. Since the day that it first started, up to present day, Aethas still hasn't figured out as to why it happened. However, since it doesn't seem to harm anyone close to him, he just let it be. Maybe the answer will naturally come to him in the near distant future. For now, let it serve as an extra measure against anyone who wished to harm him. Plus it's an easy way to gain soul essence. It just served to him on a silver platter. 3. That aside, when Aethas arrived at the classroom of Professor Sunreach, it was a surprise to see that he was the only one who came on time. All the other kids seemed to take their sweet time today, it seems. When he got there, Aethas saw Professor Sunreach sitting on his couch reading his book without a care in the world. "You've finally arrived, I see." The old elf closed his book and fixated his gaze on the young soon-to-be mage that arrived right on time. Seeing that Aethas was confused, some clarification must be done, it seems. "Don't bother looking around. I lied about the time you are supposed to show up for today's final examination." He smiled, much to Aethas' confusion. Why would he lie about such things? What the point of that unless? "Your guess is correct. I have something that might interest you." The old elf pulled out an envelope sealed in wax, depicting an upside-down eye, the crest of the Kirintor. The ruling organization and the Council of Muggies resided in the magical city of the Laran. "As my most promising disciple, I reserve the right to give you the best treatment and pave the path for your promising future. This is the recommendation and residential right for you to enter the Laran, hence the reason for your early summon. But first prove to me that you have what it takes and earn that right." Professor Sunreach summoned an orb. "Show me your power, my young disciple." The moment Aethas let his hand touch the orb, it glowed with a brilliant light, acting as a bright beacon for villages miles around. Hours later, the children finally arrived. When they got there, they managed to spot the top of their class, standing quietly in the corner next to their professor, holding a letter and token in hand, quietly looking at them. "Class, before the final examination start, I wish for you all to give a round of applause for your fellow classmate. Aethas, he has graduated early and will soon be departing in the most prestigious college this world has to offer, joining the Sunriver Sanctuary in the magical city of the Laran." Did quite. These kids know too well what kind of place is the Laran from their teacher, the magical city where many of the most powerful magus reside. Chapter 7, The Exam. Family Business. Part 1. After hearing the news that Athos has been accepted into the magical city of Dalaran, the student went into an uproar after a moment of silence, much to the displeasure of Professor Sunreach. He had previously expected the classroom to be loud but not this loud. All right, quiet down, he snapped his fingers, amplified with magic to make it even louder. Getting accepted to Dalaran is one thing, but it's not like he will be leaving immediately. Transportation will be quite costly, thus he will be staying for a year until the portal is stabilized. Professor Sunreach's words caused the excitement to die down quite considerately. 1. Hearing his words, the 6 children that followed Athos, which include Valira, Letheria, Faramis, Forrolden, Andorath and Ronmat, let out a sigh of relief. Look like their leader won't be going anywhere soon. They all thought the one who felt the most relief was none other than Valira. For some reason, she doesn't want Athos to leave at all. Alright, take a seat and prepare for your exam. I do hope all of you actually done some studying. Athos, you will help me oversee this exam since you are more than qualified for this, he ordered. Athos has no qualm for such task, however he wished the old professor would inform him of this days before the exam, not an hour before the exam. An hour before the exam, after Athos touched the orb summoned by Professor Sunreach and caused a burst of light that illuminated the surrounding and possibly drawn in way too much information. This amount of mana, how is this even possible? This is beyond that of a 13-year-old child, Professor Sunreach exclaimed with excitement as he watched the magic reaction on display. The orb name is Orb of Magic Sense, a little invention that he himself came up with. The orb's main purpose is to test for the amount of magic of a being that came into contact with it. The brighter it shines, the larger the quantity and purer the mana reserve that being has. Judging by how bright it is, Professor Sunreach came to conclusion that Athos was very talented in the arcane art. No, talent might be an understatement as well as an insult for him. Sunreach was glad that he trusted his sixth sense after being around Athos for the past 3 years. The boy mana quantity just exploded. That's it. You don't need to take this pitiful exam. From today onward, you shall be my apprentice, Professor Sunreach proclaimed. There's no way he would let anyone. That includes the old fogey in Dalaran taking this diamond in the rough first before him. That's the story of how Athos just became the apprentice of a Professor Sunreach. Instead of a normal student at school, Athos has the right to learn true magic now. But Professor, what about Dalaran? Athos was speechless by Professor Sunreach's reaction after he touched the orb. Screw Dalaran. You can't go there anyway. At least not yet. The portal between 2 continents is currently being stabilized, and I'm afraid it won't be available within the next year or so. The old elf stroked his goatee, seemingly proud of himself. 1. Then what is the point of giving that letter of recommendation early? Athos wished he could scream those words out at the old elf, however he quickly swallowed those words. I was going to send you to Sunstrider Isle to meet one of my disciples in Quel'Danas, where he can teach you personally before you headed off to Dalaran if your talent isn't as ridiculous as shown a moment ago. He pointed at the Orb of Magic Sense. All right, master. Athos couldn't bother to argue with this old elf and just accepted his fate before accepting the letter of recommendation and a token of the Kirintor. Starting from this day onward, he shall be known as the apprentice of the mage Sunreach. Right, since you are cutting above the rest of the somewhat mediocre talents among your peers, I shall let you be my assistant and proctor the exam. I'm sure you have some integrity to not overly abuse your authority. He smirked. Of course there's a deeper meaning to that, not overly abuse his authority as the proctor. Could this perhaps be the legendary benefit of being above the laws? Athos thought deeply onto the topic before reluctantly agreed. The reason for his reluctance was the fact he too doesn't know about the topic of today's exam either, and it doesn't seem like Professor Sunreach would be willing to share the answer key. For a matter of fact, maybe he had confidence in Athos' competency. Part 2. Athos quietly patrolling around the classroom, watching the kids struggling on their final exam. Of course he tried to abuse his power by giving them small hints, since all of them are somewhat close to him as friends, but seeing how they still does not get the correct answers, Athos could only let out a long sigh. Aren't blood elves supposed to be talented in enchanting and disenchanting? He thought. 2. Watching all these kids messed up such an easy task of just bubbled in answers for multiple choice questions and a short essay, it's baffling. Athos could imagine how they would definitely screwed up on the practical examination part of the test, which required them to enchant a bracer with the minor health enchantment. He feared for what might hold in the future, with this batch of talented individual defending against what might as well be event that could end the world many times over. However, there's a silver lining in every cloud, as his group of minions managed to do quite well for themselves, Letheria to be exact. She already moving on to the practical part of the examination. Athos could tell that she's going to make a name for herself in the near future with such beautiful handiwork. As for the rest of the crews, they still managed to enchant a passable piece of work, not bad in any way whatsoever. Enchanting is an intricate art. Athos found that fact after months on end studying the arts. One has to have sufficient control over the arcane power and basic knowledge of arcane magic at least, to make even the most basic piece of enchantment. That said, all Sindore indeed has to master such arts. It's a mandatory requirement lest they want to turn into one of those wretches lurking in the woods and the ruins of Silvermoon. Athos shuddered unconsciously, thinking that there's a possibility of him turning into one of those things. At least he won't need to worry about it for a long while, as he had plenty of mana to keep himself from going insane. Plus there's also that necklace that was enchanted by Professor Sunreach years ago, unless Athos decided to go full mayhem and launch destruction like birthday confetti. That's problem for the future. By noon, the examination was officially declared over. Luckily no one fails the exam. They just barely got a passing mark of either failing or passing the exam by 1 or 2 questions. However, it was enough for these children to get a recommendation for further studying at the Sunstrider Isle. Although the recommendation would only allow them to attend normal basic classes, it would be enough to change their future by quite a large margin. Getting a good paying job such as an assistant for tradesmen, joining the workforce and better the lives of their own family and themselves. The good part is, all of his minions managed to be the top of the class with their score and earn extra years of training into advanced classes. Athos couldn't help but feel proud of himself. Spending all those extra time helping them study didn't go to waste after all. A capable leader need capable underlings, as they always said. Who say that? Athos did just now. Alright, you children can go home after you receive your letter of recommendations. Just be sure to read the instructions carefully, he instructed them. Peering out the window, he could see a crowd of parents waiting with hopeful expressions on their face. Later that day, after class with Professor Sunreach were dismissed, for good this time and not to just, oh come back right after summer break, type of crap. Boss. I made it. Faramis has excitement on his face, he looked toward Athas in hope of receiving praises. Yes, you did great, just try harder in the future. Being most likely the most loyal of henchmen under Athas, of course he would not deny him of any praise, more so Athas would encourage the kid to try even harder to improve himself. Athas. There you are. I finally found you. Quickly follow me back home. From among the group of parents, the towering ORC-like figure of Athas' father called out for him, fully donned in shining armor and a great sword on his back. The man beckoned for Athas to come over to his side, seemingly in quite an urgent, from the look of it, something must have happened and he did not know about it. Can you at least tell me what the hell is going on, old man? His father quickly pulled out a parchment that was crumpled up into a bowl and tossed it to Athas. The moment he unscrambled up the notice, his face immediately darkens. Chapter 8, War Chief Command, let move into a cemetery. The notice state, War Chief Command, Ghostlands. Just reading the name alone gave Athas a horrible feeling inside his stomach. He steeled his nerve and continued reading. War Chief Command, Ghostlands. All bodied members of the Horde are hereby ordered to report to Arcanist Vandril at Tranquilien in the Ghostlands. Your help is needed to turn back the numberless Scourge invaders and secure the help of the Forsaken in fighting our common enemy. To reach Tranquilien, follow the road south from February Square and into the Ghostlands. Destiny calls. The notice was written boldly in red. Athas could see why his father seemed to be in a hurry now. He's going on a deployment and he's going to take us along with him. Plus the fact that there's a big reward posted below and bonus included. So, you are telling me that you want me and Mom out of all people to move into the Ghostlands and settle there? A complete dead zone filled with undead. Are you out of your mind, old man? Athas couldn't take it anymore with his father eccentricity. It's one thing if it's just him coming with this ORC of an elf, but asking him to brother his mother along? Don't worry too much about it. Safety is guaranteed at the Tranquilien. It's the most fortified place in the entire region. His father pointed out that was somewhat true based on the game. Tranquilien was formerly an elven village, but after the Scourge invaded and turned the zone into a deserted wasteland full of Armani trolls and Scourge, it was abandoned. That was until the Forsaken came over and take up resident and allied themselves with the Blood Elves against their common enemy. But why do you want us to come with you to that place though? Athas frowned. What else, my son? You be training with your daddy here to inherit the family business, the brute of an elf proclaimed loudly. So that was your goal? Bullshit, although, once Athas thought about it, it could be a great way to gain more fighting experience and power level himself up a little with the numberless Scourge, along with a side dish that was formerly the Great Armani Empire, since all the pest in Eversong Woods is barely enough to fill the gap in his teeth anymore with the amount of mana they had. Thinking about the possible pros and cons, Athas nodded. Alright, I'll bite the bait. My guess is you want me to convince Mom to move into the Ghostlands, right? Knowing his own mother, there is absolutely no way in hell she would agree to his dad's crazy idea of moving with him, thus it all came down to him. No, surprisingly your mother actually agreed without a second thought when I proposed the plans to her. She was saying something about possibly expanding her company to other areas instead of staying local, along with the fact that the real estates in Ghostlands should be dirt cheap since no one is stupid enough to buy it. Father Athas repeat the words of Athas' mother without missing a single detail. Damn. She's right. Who in their right mind would buy pieces of land that is currently infested with undead? So it should be dirt cheap, and with their current capital income, it will be enough to carve a huge chunk of Ghostlands for themselves. All they need to do is clean up the undead infestation a little bit over time, if not completely destroy Deathholm and end the Scourge presence in the Quel'Thalas once and for all. Alright. What do you want me to do? Athas asked his father with excitement clearly shown on his face. There's money to be made after all, even the possibility of people are noble too. There's a saying, with wealth comes great power. I want you to give up on going to the Sunstrider Isle. Before his father could finish the sentence, deal. When can we move? Athas had already agreed. Hold it. Wasn't that a bit too rash? I thought you would throw a tantrum when I told you to give up on going to a good college to become a mage. How can you agree so quickly? Although Father Athas had already made some backup plans, such as letting the mage advisor in his unit tutoring his son instead. Of course. I'm not going to the Sunstrider Isle. Professor Sunreach cancelled that plan and took me as his apprentice instead, and tutoring me into I'm qualified enough to be sent to Dalaran. Athas dropped a bombshell on his father with such news. Dear God. Dalaran? Isn't my son too talented? The city of magic. The place where the bloodline of the Sunstrider dynasty once study. Wait, hold on, Professor Sunreach? That old bastard actually took in my son as his apprentice. Ha ha ha. This is great. Part 2. Convincing Professor Sunreach was surprisingly an easy task the moment Athas brought up the idea. The old elf was already packing up ready to leave at a moment's notice. It was even before he could brought up the offer that his father told him to give to this mage here. Without much else to do, the family of 3 along with an old mage set off on the road that same day. Their destination? It's Tranquilien, of course. Where else would they head to? Definitely not the Eastern Plagueland. That's just suicide. Getting to Tranquilien itself is already a harsh ordeal that must be overcome. Luckily, they had a group of escorts, mainly his father Farstrider unit, consist of roughly a dozen of Farstriders. The phrase, Farstrider, might be a bit much, as his father informed him about the hierarchy of the group, starting from the bottom up, which consists of a regular ranger or hunter who enlisted into the group, followed by Farstrider, or member who had proven themselves, followed by lieutenant, who co-op command the unit with the captain, which was the rank of his father. Above that they have the ranger captain whose sole purpose is to command the leadership below him or her. Above that are the Ranger Lord, who are mainly distinguished and revered members of the organization. The future Regent Lord, Lord Timur Theron, was at this rank before he took the mantle of leader for the Blood Elves people, and finally, the most exalted member, the Ranger General. This rank held control of the Farstriders organization, as well as the military power of the nation. The moment Athas laid his eyes on his father's subordinate, he was shocked to find that there is a sorcerer in the group. It was shocking for the fact that the Farstrider only mainly consists of the Ranger class, or the Rogue Assassin class. Where the hell did this sorcerer come from? Of course his father noticed the shocked expression that is all over his son's face. Oh, so you noticed? I guess you really do pay attention to my story, huh? Father Athos rolled his eyes seeing the boy's shocked expression. He is an exception, this is our group advisor. I was supposed to let him tutor you if you decide to not go to the Sunstrider Isle. He then focused his gaze toward the easygoing old elf that was Professor Sunreach. But since we have this old bastard here, I guess we put offset some stress our sorcerer had to deal with on a daily basis. Father Athos leered at Professor Sunreach, whom is currently messing with the surrounding wildlife with his magic. Judging by his father's tone, there must be something fishy going on between the both of them, to cause his father of all people to look at the old man as if he were his arch-nemesis. With that said and done, all the necessary personnel had been gathered and ready for departure. They quickly went on their way toward the Ghostlands region and straight to Tranquilien. They need to get there as soon as possible, lest they want to be ambushed by the wretches, scourge, or in any case the common untamed wildlife in the woodland. The thing that Athos noticed not long after he arrived on this new Azeroth is that the world is huge, beyond the normal comparison. Unlike that game which make traveling look like a joke due to the distances between locations, from Eversong would directly crossing over into the Ghostlands would take them at least a minimum of 2 days constantly traveling. Stopping and rest at night would drag it out even further. It would take at least 3 days before they arrive at Tranquilien. A special note. Their village was already near the border to begin with, and during those times, they will constantly be on their guard against their surroundings. Luckily, Athos and his mother, along with Professor Sunreach, doesn't have to worry about standing up for night watch, as they were technically civilians, thus they leave the duty to the more capable rangers and Farstriders of his father unit. When they arrived at the border that separates Eversong Woods and the Ghostlands, his father stopped the convoy and looked back at the carriage pulled by the Hawkstrider and smirked. Girl, why don't you just get out of that box? I'm sure it must be really uncomfortable squeezing yourself in there, and the last thing I want is to have such a young lady put herself in that situation for our bonehead of a son. He chuckled as patted Athos' head, much to Athos' confusion of course, like what is he talking about? Who's hiding? Oh, an all too familiar voice. Athos doesn't really need any explanation now, he knew that voice all too well. Valera, why? He facepalmed himself. One of his minions, the capable Secretary 1, had managed to sneak herself into the convoy by hiding in an emptied out dry ration box. Chapter 9, oh boy. Part 1. Later that night, when everyone is sitting around a large campfire, in the piece of land that border Eversong Woods and the deserted Ghostlands, they all sitting in silence, staring at one specific person, Valera. She too sat there silently, keeping her head down in embarrassment as eyes were focusing onto her. Valera, mind telling me why are you hiding in the crate? Valera blushed hard, she could only try to stammer out some words under such detailed scrutiny that is coming from Athos. In truth, Valera ran away from home the moment she got wind of the news that Athos' family are going to move away, into the dangerous wildland that is the Ghostlands. Young lady, my guess is that you ran away from home, didn't you? Father Athos smirked. He was confident that his guess was straight on point just by watching the reaction of the young teenager. Did your parents know that you ran away from home? Athos' mother asked, worrying about what kind of hell would ensue them if Valera parent filed a missing child report to the local militia. It wasn't in any doubt that chaos would not going to stir up in their former little village, and at some point, there will be someone who say, hey, I saw your little girl snuck into the Athos family convoy. It's difficult to explain to any distressed parents on the reason of why did your beautiful daughter just run off with my family precious son. Depended on the outcome, there could be a feud and set in some bad blood, that or a more positive outcome of both parties came up with a mutual beneficial deals. I don't think you need to worry about that, madam. I told them that I was on a job for the guild. Valera replied. She had lied to her parents, saying that she accepted a quest from the guild and would be leaving for a week. At first her parents were worried, however, due to their family situation of living in a poor village, they reluctantly agreed. Any source of income would help them a lot in the long run, plus they know their daughter can look after herself. Dear Lord. Athos facepalmed himself, thinking how courageous this little girl must have been to have pulled off such a stunt. He doubts that her parents would ever allow her to set foot out of the house again, even if it means losing a part of their family earnings. Money means absolutely nothing if you lose your children, more so true for the blood elves as their population were greatly diminished to less than 10%. Dear, should we send her back to the village? Her parents would worry themselves sick once they caught on to the lie. Mother Athos suggested to her husband, as he himself is in command of leading this convoy. Father Athos too was contemplating on whether to send the little girl back or not, however it would pose major problems for the group. Such as they have to split up their manpower to safely deliver this girl back, and they have already set foot into the dangerous territory, so he couldn't do it as the little group would be easy picking for any wretched bandit party or worse, scourge. Thus there's the choice of letting the girl follow them into the Ghostlands. From there they could arrange further transport back to Eversong Woods. Out of all those options, the last one seems to be the most feasible. Even Athos had to agree with the idea. Splitting up now is just pure stupidity, and they couldn't just turn the entire convoy back just for one person either. Athos looked at his father. The elf seemed to notice his gaze and simply nodded his head. Mother, I think it's better if Valera tag along with our convoy until we arrive at Tranquilien. I'm sure we can arrange some form of transportation service to get her back to the village, instead of endangering ourselves by splitting our forces. Father Athos couldn't have worded it any better. He couldn't help but feel proud of his son, such a young age and have already mastered the basics of military tactics. If Athos could truly read his father's mind, he would definitely unload a few rounds of explosive marble onto the man's forehead before cracking it open and see if his skull is filled with tofu or what. Mastered the basics of military tactics, my ass. Even a kid would be smart enough to come up with such a logical choice. Wait, he's a kid, much to Athos' own displeasure. When will I grow up? He questioned himself in the back of his mind, thinking how much pain it is not being able to grow up fast enough. Part 2. Athos. Look. Isn't it beautiful? Valera pointed at the beautiful wildlife and vegetation of the once population southern front of Quel'Thalas, now known as the Ghostlands. It was decided that Valera would follow the convoy until they reached Tranquilien. From there they will decide the next course of action. 1. For now, Aethas' parents believe that it's best for the girl to stay with them. First, it would provide the little one with protection against danger that lurked within the land. Second, it would provide their son with some sort of companions who's around his age, much to Aethas' own displeasure. Valira seemed to be too hyper on this trip than usual. The same could be said for Professor Sunreach. The old elf doesn't act like a well-respected professor anymore after their class graduation. Gone with the scholarly personality that would accompany a sage-like sorcerer, it was replaced by eccentricity of a youngster. For some odd reason, his father has been staring daggers at the old elf since the day he joined the convoy, one part being happy that a competent sorcerer had joined the party, the second, the hostile reaction was unknown. The man been trying to stand in between his wife and the old elf at every possible moment. There must be some deep history that he doesn't know about here. His father wouldn't act like an idiot for no reason. Well, he acted like an idiot most of the time that anyone would. Hardly noticed the difference. As Aethas was contemplating about his current situation, suddenly from out in the dark woods, an arrow shot toward their caravan and pinned itself onto the wooden side of the carriage. This brought the convoy to a sudden halt and his father yelling out, "Enemy attack!" Farstriders find the enemy. However, it doesn't look like finding the enemy would be a problem, as from the same direction the arrow came from, a band of wretches emerged with eyes full of greed and lust and armed, ready to fight. Well, never mind then, it looks like the enemy lack more patience than I would give them credit for. Damn wretches, all of them. Father Aethas glared at the band of marauder with hostility. Scourge is one thing, at least with Scourge it's easier to prepare against and let not forget, much easier to deal with than a bunch of rats that hidden within their society and constantly attacking their weak point due to their thirst for magic. What are you waiting for? Kill them. We need to get moving quickly before our presence attracted more than what we asked for, Father Aethas ordered, and immediately the clash initiated between the two groups, arrows flying alongside frostbolt and fireball. Let not forget the old-fashioned sword and shield bashing. Sound crude for elves, but it gets the job done, and that is all Father Aethas asked for. As for Aethas, his mother and Valira, they made sure to stay on the sideline, far away from the fighting stages between the Farstriders and the marauding band of wretches. Aethas' mother being considerate and tried to cover both of the children's eyes, preventing them from watching the bloody brawl, one-sided massacre, while saying, "You children are not old enough to witness such a scene yet," much to Aethas' annoyances, but he could see that his mother cared. She hoped that Aethas wasn't traumatized by such course. Aethas could only stood on side and quietly attracting the dead wretch's soul toward himself. Thankfully, the soul energy is mostly invisible to mortal eyes unless they are sorcerer trained to pick up on such energy. Fortunately, the sorcerers in the group are too busy to notice such minor movement caused by Aethas, else he could attract a whole lot of trouble toward himself, as necromancy were outlawed in Quel'Thalas since their people couldn't forget about the horror of such horrendous school of magic. The feeling of ecstasy washed all over him, as the soul of humanoid beings are much more potent than that of beasts. He could feel a major boost in his own mana reserve as his soul were boiling and churning to devour all the souls of the wretches nearby. That was until he suddenly felt a tug from behind. What the? Before he noticed it, it was already too late. A deformed face of what formerly a blood elf stared at him. A rogue wretch had managed to sneak around the massive brawl and got behind the enemy line where the civilians are kept, and Aethas seemed to be an unlucky victim as the wretch took off into the woods, dragging the little boy with him. "No!" Aethas, his mother screamed, which brought the attention to his father, who finally noticed that there was something wrong. His precious baby boy had been kidnapped. At that moment, something finally snaps inside the Oasi-like elf mind. "I'll fucking kill you all." With a swing of his mighty sword, he cleaved the last remaining survivor of the band of wretches marauder before taking off after Aethas' kidnapper. With hatred filled his eyes. Chapter 10, I'm a kidnapped victim. What game is this? Aethas had lost track of time since the moment of his kidnapping by a certain wretch. Really? You know they're coming after you, right? Aethas grew bored out of the amount of time this wretch had been running and dodging. He tried to take his mind off this kidnapping by just talk about something, even if it's to his captor, as there isn't any point in being quiet and uncooperative. Either way, Aethas was captured, there is no escape, yet still looking for his chance to make a run for it, though, might possibly on the moment the wretch drop him. The wretch hissed at him from time to time, thus Aethas came to the conclusion that this one addiction seemed to get deep into the brain, to the point where it lost all sense and method of communication. This reminded Aethas of another type of addiction effect that elves suffered called withering from the Nightborn, a much further distant cousin of the Highborn, night elves and blood elves themselves. This brought up another problem for Aethas though. He's practically dealing with the humanoid beasts here. Imagine a beast with humanoid intelligence is going to be quite a pain to deal with, especially when you're a victim of mana-thirsted one, who are known to cannibalize their victim or worse, violate them and before draining every drop of mana from their victim's body. Thinking of the possible consequences, being eaten alive is the least of his worries, being violated is. Hearing stories from his village and through the lore from the wiki page, it gave him the shudder just by thinking about it. Aethas doesn't mind if it was a beautiful woman, but when it came to a mindless monster whom is a degenerated version of his own species? Screw that. I'm definitely going to make a run for it. Or better yet. Dad. Help me. Aethas screamed with all of his might. 1. As for why Aethas doesn't try to use any offensive magic to try and escape, one reason, there isn't much that could instantly cripple this wretch or kill it outright. If he couldn't do any of that in one cost-effective spell, it would just piss this thing off even further and it might decide to chow down on him right there and then, instead of bringing him back to its lair. Plus, the only useful thing he got from the Book of the Dead was the ability to convert souls into mana and expanding his reserve beyond that of normal mortal. As for offensive? What's that? There isn't any. It's just theoretical knowledge that applied to previously mastered spell. The rest is just Kel'Thuzad damn autobiography and his propaganda for the Lich King, also known as Urtha's Menethil. 2. To sum it up, Aethas' only magical knowledge are enchanting, disenchanting, soul conversions and the ability to rot control of the undead from the scourge, only the weaker one of course, and some basic magic to create a small spark to light a fire. Which isn't enough to kill. If he were to have his bag of explosive marble, which roughly had around 20 to 30 left, he could detonate the damn thing on this sucker and make a run for it. But no, it's too good to be true. He left the bag on the carriage thinking that his dad could keep them all safe instead of carrying it on him at all times, and now he paid the price. However, a ray of hope finally came to Athas, in the form of his father calling his name from behind. Dad! I'm at this direction, he shouted out with all his might once again and struggling to get loose from his captor. I'm coming to you, my boy. Just hang in there, he screamed. It seemed like his dad managed to pick up on his voice and chase after them. The wretch noticed that Athas was being quite loud and much of a nuisance, thus a surprise in the form of a punch in the gut, which was strong enough to knock the air out of him and caused him to pass out from the pain. That is all Athas remember, a sharp pain in the gut and everything went black. Athas could only pray that nothing too bad would happen to him afterward, and the voice of his father getting fainter and fainter as time goes by. Yep, it seems like this isn't going to end well for Athas. Hopefully nothing like waking up totally naked or not waking up at all, ever. That is probably the worst case scenario. Part 2. By the time Athas woken up, he did not know how much time had passed in the outside world, since all he could see and feel right now is the cold and wet ground inside of a cave, in the middle of nowhere, and being bounded up with rope, alongside a group of victims who gotten themselves into the same situation as himself, possibly becoming feed for the wretches. The next thing he looked for was any violation that had happened when he passed out, only to let out a sigh of relief the moment he found his clothes were still intact. Looked like nothing had happened yet, but he wished the same could be said for the victim around him, ranging from beaten up and drained of mana blood elves female and male. Their will seems to have completely been broken by these savages, only breathing husk of themselves remained, they could only describe as soulless meatbag, if there's a better word for it. As for the location itself, the place is littered with bones and rotten corpses of victims. Needless to say, it stinks to high heaven. Imagine the smell of dead fish baking in the hot sun for a few days. The odor is much worse here since they are in an enclosed space. Hey you! The little boy. Finally woken up, I see, a raspy voice of a woman called out for him from the corner of the cave, where all the dead victims are kept by the wretches. Noticing the voice, Athas turned his attention there. You were trying to cross the border, huh? You walk right into those wretches' ambush, same as us and that spy over there. For some reason, Athas could feel a major deja vu coming from this scene. Fate indeed has a sense of twisted humor. 4. Damn you forsaken scum, if it weren't for you, I could have sneaked into Eversong wood and complete my mission as planned, but you couldn't help but chase and lead me right into their ambush, huh? The spy seems to be a night elf, he must have snuck in through from the eastern plagueland or so Athas concluded, but hold it. What the hell? Other. I think you got the wrong game mixed up. Athas cried out bitterly inside. 3. What is going to happen to us? The spy cried out after noticing the grim environment around him. What else? Possibly return to your Elune and me? Eternal suffering, the forsaken woman concluded. It was not wrong, that will be their fate since Athas know the habit of the wretches better than these two, he know of their dirty personality. I can guarantee that as well. You two might not know this, but the wretches had a bad habit of breaking their victim open and drain every sip of mana from their body, before possibly cannibalize them. Athas added fuel to the fire, just because it was amusing to watch the night elf spy wailed in despair. There's no crying about it now, we are all brothers and sisters in chain now. The forsaken woman told the both of them as she glanced at the horror caused by these creatures, which was second to that of the scourge. Well, this isn't funny anymore, here they come. From Athas' corner of the cave, he could see a group of wretches just enter the cave with drool all over their mouth, heading for their direction. It seems like one of them is going to die today. By now the other two also noticed the incoming hostile already. The one who attracted the most attention seemed to be the night elf spy as he trying to undo his binding, and surprisingly, he succeeded. Haha. I'm not going to die here today. 2. As he said that, he charged at the wretch after picking up a sharp piece of femur bone on the ground and shanked one of them in the gut. Sure, it killed one of the wretches, however he miscalculated, who said there was only one wretches. Before long a group of them already jumped the stupid night elf and shredded him to pieces, before squeezing all the mana in his body and then moving on to the body of their former allies. Well, that was stupid, who let him be a spy? Athas' mouth twitched seeing how dumb that night elf was. Whoever trained this idiot needed to be fired, or better yet, just kept training more of these dumbass so they wouldn't have to issue about having spy in their kingdom ever again. Don't worry, it baffled me too, the forsaken woman nodded in agreement. Asterisk boom. The sound of an explosion shook the area, spooking the wretches and causing them to immediately rush outside to check on the situation. Well, I guess it's time for us to leave. We couldn't let this situation go to waste now that there's someone helping us outside. The forsaken woman too had broke from her binding. It seemed like she managed to sneak a dagger inside of her dead body. Wow, never knew being an undead could be so convenient. Athas couldn't help but comment after seeing the woman digging out a dagger from inside of her back and cutting the rope. I know, I was surprised about it too after I regained my freedom.